Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I'm thinking about cooking and selling fried chicken here at Dead and Roasted. Imagine that. KFC, but you can walk away with a latte and food poisoning. Speaking of chicken, today's stories feature a variety of terrifying tales that will turn you into one. A church haunting, a church's chicken stalker, and more. Just don't expect more churchiness beyond that. These are tales from the break room. By the way, my brand new book comes out in a little over a week, on July 8th. It's called Creepy Campfire Stories. Pre-order it if you haven't already, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or at creepycampfirestories.com. You can send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit to have me narrate them. And be sure to follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Seen in my most private moments. From KayKay. This happened a few months after working at a church's chicken, of all places. Definitely not my dream job. It was supposed to be a simple starter job for a young girl, but it led to something that I'll never be able to forget. The good news was this place paid better than the McDonald's nearby, and my boss, Richie, let us take home mess-ups. I think it was about 4 months in, mostly working register during the dinner rush. The location got steady business. Families would pick up dinner and construction workers would come by to grab lunch. This guy came in on a Tuesday. I remember, because we were dead slow. Just me and Dev working, and I was refilling the sweet tea when the door chimed. He was medium height, maybe 35 years old or so, and he wore a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. Nothing special about him except how he looked at me. Not the usual quick glance at the menu board. He stared right at me, smiled a little smile, and walked up to the counter. He ordered a 3-piece dark with mashed potatoes and gravy. While I rang him up, he leaned on the counter, closer than customers usually did, and he said my name, read it off my name tag, but drew it out real weird. This is how I remember him saying it. Kay. That's pretty. Kay. I just gave him the total. He paid an exact change, counting it out slow into my palm. His fingers were damp. When I pulled my hand back, he said, "You smell nice. Like vanilla." Well, I did use vanilla body wash. Even so, that creeped me out. I handed him his receipt quick, told him his number would be called. He waited by the pickup counter, watching me the whole time. When Dev called his order, he took the bag and gave me that little smile again. Then he left. The house I was renting was about 15 minutes away. It was a small 2-bedroom place in an older subdivision. The neighbors were so close I could hear their TV through the walls sometimes. I would see people walking their dogs past my windows. The bathroom had this frosted glass window that faced the side yard. You couldn't see details through it, just shapes and shadows. Well, that night I was taking my usual shower before bed. I always showered around 10:30, after my shows ended. I recall noticing through the frosted glass a shadow pass by. Looked like possibly someone walking a dog, maybe stopping to let it sniff around. But the shadow lingered for maybe a minute, then moved on. It happened all the time. The Barnes family next door had 2 beagles after all, so I didn't think anything of it. Thursday, he came back. Same time and same order. 3-piece, dark, mashed potatoes and gravy. This time when he got to the counter, he was already smiling. "Hi, Kay. You look tired." I was tired. I'd stayed up late studying for my accounting class. Long day," I said, trying to be polite but brief. "You should get more sleep. What time did you finally get to bed? Midnight? Later?" That was right. Just after midnight, actually. Maybe it was a lucky guess, but still he made my skin crawl. Lots of people stay up late, especially people studying. I forced a customer service smile and told him his total. He leaned in again while paying. Vanilla again. Do you use that every night? Around, what, 10:30? I fumbled his change. He was still smiling, watching my face like he was drinking in my discomfort. When Dev finally called his order, he picked it up, but he didn't leave right away. He stood by the door, looking back at me. "See you later, Kay," he said. I told Dev about him during cleanup. Dev said I should tell Richie that maybe we could get the guy banned from our location. I did tell him, but he ended up saying that someone complimenting my body wash was not reason enough to ban them. He told me to let him know if anything worse happens, but that's all the help I got from him. That night, I double-checked all my locks before showering. I pulled the bathroom blinds all the way down, even though you couldn't see through the frosted glass anyway. I specifically remember closing the bathroom door because my hairdryer cord was hanging down, and I had to move it. That happens a lot. The door didn't lock, though. It's an old house with painted-over mechanisms. But it did latch shut. I know I heard it. I started my shower, trying to wash off the creepiness from the day. I washed my hair, shaved my legs, my normal routine. When I pulled back the curtain to grab my towel, the bathroom door was wide open. Not cracked or ajar or anything, but wide open. I could see straight down the hallway. I could have sworn my heart stopped. I wrapped the towel around myself and listened. Old houses like this, they settle. That's how they describe it, right? Doors pop open sometimes, maybe you hear an odd crack here and there. The latch was probably loose, I told myself. Had to be. I crept to my bedroom, still dripping wet, brainstorming excuses for how the door had been opened. I just needed to get dressed, I thought. Then I could finally calm down. I reached for my dresser drawer. There was a giggle, a soft and muffled giggle, from my closet. I froze. I couldn't breathe. The closet door was closed, but I know I heard someone laughing in there, trying to stay quiet. There was someone in my bedroom with me. Someone in my home. Everything inside of my body wanted to scream, but instinct took over. I backed toward the bedroom door slow and casually, like I hadn't heard a thing. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and I made it to the hallway. Only then did I run full speed, bursting out the front door in just my towel, barefoot, probably looking insane. Mrs. Chittles was on her porch next door, watering her plants even though it was past 11. I ran to her, frantically explaining that someone was in my house. She believed me, pulling me inside and locking her door. She even called 911. The cops arrived fast. It was a small suburb, not much happening on weeknights. They sent 2 units, and they surrounded my house, announcing themselves. I watched from Mrs. Chittle's window as they went in. About 5 minutes later, we saw him. He came flying out my back door, trying to jump the fence to the Barnes' yard. The cops were on him before he made it over. He was wearing a gray shirt and jeans. The same guy from the restaurant. An officer came to get my statement while they processed the scene. She told me they'd found wet footprints throughout the house, in my bathroom, my bedroom, even the kitchen. The shower walls were wet in streaks at face height, like someone had pressed their body against them. His shirt was soaked across the chest, and there was water all over his mouth. I would later be told, because I did not want to think about it and gather the implication myself, that the guy had been licking my shower walls. licking where I'd been. That's how he got caught. He apparently knew the police were probably coming, but he just had to stay, had to get a taste. It also turns out he knew where my spare key was, under a fake rock by the door. I had mentioned it once to a coworker when I'd locked myself out. Somehow he overheard that. They also found notebooks in his car, pages about my schedule, what I wore, things I'd say to other customers or coworkers. There were even sketches of me in my yard through windows. He'd been watching me for weeks before he ever came into the restaurant. The guy's name was David. David had a record, peeping Tom stuff, breaking and entering, but nothing violent yet. The prosecutor said I was lucky. These types of folks like to escalate things. The giggling in the closet, waiting for me to undress. He was enjoying what he saw and enjoying my fear. He would have kept pushing those boundaries. I had to break my lease after that, so I could move in with my cousin across town. I quit churches, got a job at an office where you need a key card to get in, and I changed my whole routine. Different gym, different grocery store, different everything. David got 18 months, but would likely only serve 6. The prosecutor says I can get a restraining order when he gets out, but we all know how much those are worth. I still think about that giggle sometimes. How long he might have stood there if I'd gotten dressed, gone to bed. What was he planning to do if I'd fallen asleep? I think about this all the time, and since that day I have not felt safe, no matter where I am, how alone I'm supposed to be. I think about how normal David looked. Just another customer ordering chicken. But he had to take notice of me. Church, from Jamie Bellway. I needed money bad my junior year. Books, rent, the meal plan I couldn't afford, but had to have anyway. My roommate Garrett told me his church was hiring a night custodian. 20 hours a week, $10 an hour, mostly just emptying trash and mopping. I figured why not. St. Agatha's was one of those old Catholic churches built when the town had money. Stone and stained glass, real carved wood, not the pressboard stuff they use now. Father Brennan interviewed me in his office, asked about my class schedule, made sure I was comfortable working alone at night. When I mentioned I was a history major, he perked up, started talking about the church archives in the basement. We spent 20 minutes discussing medieval monasticism before he remembered this was a job interview. I started that Monday. Diane trained me. She'd been doing maintenance there forever, had that way of moving through the building like it was her own house. Short woman, graying hair always in a ponytail, hands rough from years of cleaning chemicals. She walked me through everything. Where they kept supplies, which doors stuck, how to work the ancient boiler system. The church had a whole underground level. Not uncommon for old buildings, she explained. Storage rooms, the furnace room, and the old crypt from when they still did burials on church property. She showed me the door to the crypt, heavy wood with iron hinges, tucked in an alcove near the boiler, kept locked, she said. Nobody buried down there since the 60s. The door had a tendency to work loose though, something about the building settling, so I should check it was secure when I locked up. She mentioned the previous night custodian while showing me how to clean the altar without knocking anything over. Rory something. Young guy, worked there about 8 months before he started getting flaky. Showing up late, calling out, that kind of thing. Then he just stopped coming entirely. Never even picked up his last paycheck. She paused like she wanted to add something, then just moved on to explaining which cleaning products to use on marble versus wood. My shift ran 8 to midnight, Monday through Friday. The church closed at 7 after evening mass, so I had the place to myself. I liked it. Quiet, peaceful. I'd bring my laptop, take breaks between tasks to work on papers. The building creaked and settled like old buildings do, but it never bothered me. Felt safer than my apartment, honestly. Late September, about a month into the job, I started finding mud. Not a lot at first, just little clumps here and there, like someone had walked through with dirty shoes. Always seemed to start from that side hallway where the crypt door was, tracking out into the main sanctuary. I figured someone from the morning mass crowd had muddy shoes. But then I realized I was finding it in the mornings after I'd already cleaned. Fresh mud on floors I'd mopped just hours before. Asked Diane about it next time I saw her. She got this look, not quite worry, but something close. Said she'd been finding mud too, in the mornings when she came in to set up for daily mass. Always cleaned it up before anyone else arrived. We compared notes. The tracks always started from the same spot, that hallway by the crypt door. Always led to the same section of pews, middle left side, about 8 rows back. She told me to make sure that crypt door was really locked. Not just closed, but locked. Test the handle. She'd started doing the same thing in the mornings. I began paying more attention after that. The mud appeared maybe twice a week. No pattern I could figure out. Not tied to weather. We'd had a dry spell, no rain for weeks. The tracks didn't match any shoes I could identify. Too long, too narrow. And they had this dragging quality, like whoever left them was favoring one leg. One night in October, I decided to check the crypt door in the middle of my shift instead of just at the end. Went down there around 10, tested the handle, locked solid, went back to vacuuming the sanctuary. When I walked past that section of pews, middle left, 8 rows back, I stopped. There was mud on the seat. Fresh, still damp. A handprint on the back of the pew in front of it. Fingers too long, palm too narrow. The crypt door was still locked when I checked again. But now there were mud tracks leading from the pews back to the door, like something had gone back the way it came. I mentioned it to Father Brennan the next day, trying to sound casual. Maybe someone was playing pranks. He got quiet, then asked if I'd actually seen anyone. When I said no, he nodded slowly and changed the subject. But I started digging after that. The church had records going back to its founding, boxes and boxes in the archive room. Diane had given me the key weeks ago so I could vacuum in there. I spent my breaks going through old burial records, looking for, I didn't even know what. Found it in a ledger from 1958. Series of entries about a man named Lawrence Vogel. Homeless, apparently, had been sleeping in the church during winter months. Father O'Brien, the priest at the time, had been letting him stay in the basement, gave him odd jobs for food money. Then the entries stopped. Next mention was his burial in the crypt, February 1959. No cause of death listed. But there was a note in the margin, different handwriting, found in pew 8L each morning, would not leave. Growing thin. Pew 8L. 8th row back, left side. Middle section. I started watching that spot, set up my laptop where I could see it while I worked. Nothing for days. Then, a Thursday night in early November, I saw movement. Just a shape at first, dark against the darker church. It rose from behind the pew. Had it been lying on the floor? Sat in that exact spot, 8L. I couldn't make out features in the dim light. Just a figure, tall and thin, sitting perfectly still, facing forward like it was waiting for Mass to begin. I stood frozen by the altar, holding a dust rag, watching it watch nothing. Then it turned its head toward me. Slow, deliberate, Even in the dark, I could see its eyes were wrong. Reflected light that wasn't there. Like a cat's eyes, but in a face that wasn't quite the right shape. I backed away, kept backing until I hit the sacristy door. The figure stood, unfolded more than stood, too tall, joints bending wrong. It stepped into the aisle and I saw its feet were bare, muddy, leaving those prints I'd been cleaning for weeks. It spoke. Not words exactly, but something trying to be words. A wet, struggling sound like drowning. Maybe it was saying mass, maybe last. Maybe it was just the sound of something that had forgotten how throats worked. I ran, left everything, supplies, laptop, keys, drove home and called Father Brennan, told him I was sick, couldn't come in. He said he understood. Said it too quickly, like he'd been expecting this call. But here's the thing about being broke in college. You can't just quit jobs. I needed that money. Rent was due in a week. So when Father Brennan called the next morning asking if I was feeling better, could I possibly come in just to retrieve my things and finish out the week? I said yes. I went back the next night, earlier, right after the church closed. Diane was there, which surprised me. She usually worked mornings only. She had my laptop and keys waiting in the office, cleaned and neatly arranged. We sat there for a minute, not talking. Finally, she asked if I'd figured it out. About Lawrence. I told her about the records I'd found. She nodded, said there was more to it. Lawrence had been dying when Father O'Brien took him in. Tuberculosis, probably, though they didn't diagnose it. He'd spent his last weeks in that pew, too weak to move, praying. When they found him one morning, he'd been dead for days, but he kept showing up. Every night. Same pew. They'd tried everything, blessing the crypt, exorcism, moving his body to the cemetery. Nothing worked. He always came back, so they learned to live with it. Keep the door locked, not to keep him in, but to slow him down. Give people time to leave if they needed to. Clean up the mud so parishioners wouldn't ask questions. She asked if I was staying. I needed the job, I told her. She taught me the real routine then. Lock up by 9:30, before he usually appeared. Check the crypt door, but don't linger. If you see him, don't run. It startles him, makes him move wrong. Upset the next morning's mass with too much mud, maybe broken things. Just back away slowly, let him have his pew. He'll go back down around 2 a.m., sometimes 3. I could switch to afternoon shifts if I wanted. Come in at 4, clean until 8. But the pay was less. They needed night coverage specifically because of Lawrence. Hazard pay, basically, though they'd never call it that. I took the deal. Worked there another 1.5 years until graduation. Saw Lawrence maybe a dozen times, always in 8L. Sometimes he'd turn and look at me with those reflecting eyes. Once, near Christmas, I swear he nodded, like recognizing a fellow regular at Mass. The worst nights were when he didn't show up, because then I'd wonder where he was, what was keeping him. Those nights I'd prop a chair against the sacristy door and stay in there until my shift ended. Diane retired while I was there. Marcella took over the morning shift. I trained her like Diane trained me. Here's where the supplies are. Here's how the boiler works. Here's what to do about the mud. She took it better than I had. Said her grandmother had seen similar things in the old country. Just part of life. My last week, I left a note in pew 8L. Just said, "Thank you for letting me work here. Jamie." Felt stupid as soon as I did it. But the next night, it was gone, and there were muddy fingerprints on the pew where it had been. Could have been from grabbing the paper. Could have been coincidence. Father Brennan retired too, right after I graduated. Father Wen runs St. Agatha's now. Young guy, very practical. He had the crypt door reinforced, better locks, steel frame. Had someone come in and clean the whole basement with industrial equipment. Even had new lighting installed. Garrett still goes to mass there sometimes. He told me they hired a cleaning service now. Professional crew that comes in during the day. Much more efficient, he said. But last month he mentioned they're looking for a night security guard. Just someone to walk through, check the doors, make sure everything's locked up properly. The cleaning crew keeps finding mud tracked through the building in the mornings. Nobody can figure out where it's coming from. I thought about calling Father Wen, warning him. But what would I say? That he needs someone who understands the real job. Someone who knows when to clean and when to leave things alone. Someone who can share a space with whatever Lawrence Vogel has become. He'll figure it out. They always do, eventually. And somewhere in town, there's probably a college student who needs money bad enough to work nights at an old church. Someone who'll take the job thinking it's just mopping floors and emptying trash. They'll learn. Woman in the Trees. From BushDog. When people hear camp counselor, most imagine the cliché late-night campfire stories and canoe races. And while that is true to an extent, they often forget about all the other stuff we have to do. Someone has to clean the place up before it opens, for example. And that was exactly my job last spring. The boss of the camp I worked for over the summer was asking around, looking for a few people to help him out in clearing the camp and getting it ready before it opens in a month. I volunteered to help. I've been a counselor at that place for a couple of summers now, so I already knew the layout, the other returning staff, what to expect. As boss man assured us, it was supposed to be a week or two of light cleaning, basic repairs, maybe moving a few bunks or clearing debris from the trails. In the end, 5 of us showed up to help. It was me, 2 older guys from the maintenance crew, a fellow counselor named Aaron, and the boss I'll call George. He's been working at the camp since the late 80s and has been running it for 17 years now, after the previous owners left and handed him the keys. He was an old grumpy guy with a bushy beard and a coffee mug permanently glued to his hand, but he was a gentle soul. The camp itself was in the middle of nowhere. Tall pines and patchy dirt roads, and a lake that still had ice floating on the far end. The kind of place you forget exists until you're out there and your phone stops getting signal. I think that's kind of the point of a summer camp though, being in nature and all that. After a quick briefing, we divided that day's work by cabins. Each of us got 2 to clear out, clean, and report if anything major needed fixing. I ended up with cabins 5 and 6. Both were a little walk past the main clearing, tucked near the woods. But I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. Fortunately for me, cabin 5 was easy. After a little push, the door opened, and after assessing the situation, I got to work. It was mostly dust and spider webs, and there was one busted window latch. So nothing unusual. I cleaned it up and did my best to try and repair the latch. I thought I did a pretty good job, but I marked it down to show it to George later, just in case. Better safe than sorry. Cabin 6, though, well, that was a different story. Right from the start, it felt wrong. Something felt very off the moment I stepped onto that porch. Even the wood creaked under my boots as I reached the door. I stood there for a second, gathering my thoughts and just listening. But the forest behind it was eerily quiet. No birds, not even wind. Felt like standing in the middle of an empty office building, not a dense forest. Not wanting to focus on that aspect longer, I unlocked the door while expecting the same musty smell as the other cabin. Instead, I got hit with this sour, earthy stench. It was like mold mixed with wet wood and something I couldn't place. Maybe rotten eggs. I held my breath and stepped inside. Everything was still in place. Bunks were neatly tucked away in the corner and cubbies were closed. There were even some leftover drawings tacked to the walls from the summer before. But the smell was so strong, it made my eyes water. I walked over to the back window to crack it open, trying not to gag. I thought something must have broken in through a loose floorboard and died somewhere. As I reached the window and opened it, I heard this soft click behind me. I turned around, thinking maybe the door had swung back on its hinges. Nope, it was still open. Then I noticed something else. On the far right bunk, the mattress had a huge dark stain running down the side. Not like old blood or anything, more like dirty, muddy water that had soaked through. I walked over and leaned in to inspect what it was. I knelt down, and the wood underneath was also damaged, looking bloated and soft, and giving off that same vile smell. I tapped it with my gloved knuckle. It gave slightly, like it was still damp. After getting up, I thought it was maybe just roof leakage. I looked up, but there was no visible stains on the ceiling. I checked around some more, eventually getting under the cabin that was raised about a foot from the ground. I wanted to check if something really did die. But I found nothing, aside from a few old candy wrappers. At this point, I figured I'd just note it down for the maintenance guys and move on. I finished sweeping out the dust, and I left the windows open to air the place out. Before I left, I snapped some photos of the stained bunk with my phone to show my friends later when I returned back to civilization. That night, me, George, and one of the maintenance guys sat around the dining table in the mess hall, talking and having a good time. George was telling some half-finished story about a raccoon that broke into the pantry and died in a cereal box when I brought up the bunk. "Cabin 6, right?" he asked. "Back right corner?" I nodded. "Yeah, smelled like something died in there. I checked all over but didn't see anything." He took a long sip from his mug before answering. "Used to be a mouse nest in there. They chewed through everything, probably under that floorboard as well. We sealed up the place pretty good years ago, but sometimes the moisture creeps back in. Just don't worry about it." Something about the way he said it didn't fill me with confidence as his words normally do. He didn't say it like he believed it, more like he wanted me to stop asking questions. And I obliged. I didn't sleep great that night. Not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the smell. It clung to my clothes and hair, even after a shower. The next day, Aaron and I were asked to help move some gear from storage into the main lodge. On our way back, I told her about the bunk and what George had said. She gave me this raised eyebrow look. "Cabin 6?" she repeated. "Did he tell you about what happened?" I stopped walking. "What do you mean?" She waited a moment, then sighed. "Okay, it's probably nothing, but a few summers back, before you started working here, there was an incident of sorts. One of the campers kept saying she saw someone in the woods, right outside the cabin. Said they stood between the trees and just watched all night." "Someone from camp? Or from the outside?" I asked, intrigued by the story. "No idea. She was 10 years old. Kids say weird stuff sometimes, but one morning, the girl was gone. Whole camp had to do a sweep until they found her a couple of hours later. She was on her bunk, despite not having been there before." I let Erin continue her story, as I carried most of the stuff on the way. "Yeah, she was all curled up and shaking and shivering. Said she was hiding from the woman in the trees. Also, she was completely soaked, head to toe. Smelled like the lake. Counselors asked her about it, but she didn't speak. They concluded she must have accidentally fallen into the lake at night, got traumatized from a near-death experience. Her parents pulled her out of the camp after that, and there was some uproar about the validity of the camp or something. I don't really know that part. George swore he fixed up the cabin after that. That night, I decided to go back to cabin 6. Not for any dramatic reason. I just wanted to see it again. Make sure I wasn't imagining how weird it felt. I waited until everyone was sleeping, grabbed my flashlight, and walked up the path alone. The air was still heavy and cold outside, but I pushed through. After a light walk, I found the cabin. The woods behind it were pitch black, and for a second I thought I saw movement in the trees. It could have been a raccoon, or it was just my nerves. I told myself it was nothing and stepped onto the porch. I could smell the foul odor even earlier now through the unlocked door, which was weird as I was sure I'd closed and latched it earlier. I even remembered the click of the lock. I slowly pushed it open, and the smell hit me again, stronger now, but also different. It was almost sweet, like rotting fruit. I covered my nose and stepped inside. My flashlight swept over the room. Nothing moved. Nothing had changed. Except for one thing. The mattress on the back right bunk had been flipped. Not messy like a wild animal had senselessly clawed at it. It was flipped neatly, like someone had reached down and deliberately turned it over, so the wet spot would no longer be visible. I stood there, gripping my flashlight tight. I was trying to rationalize the sight, saying to myself that George probably moved it after catching wind of my complaints. And then I heard it. A scrape. It came from underneath the bunk. I stopped moving, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The noise came again, slow and muted, barely noticeable. It sounded like someone was scratching their fingernail on wood. There was a small wooden panel at the base of the bunk, about half the size of a floor tile. Against my better judgment, I knelt down and shone the light at it, hoping it was just a raccoon. As the light shone underneath the bunk, I could see it clearly now. The wood was damp and cracked along the edges, and there, wedged into the seam, was something that resembled a long, dark fingernail. My body went cold. I started to back up, bumping into one of the old chairs. It clattered to the floor and the scraping stopped. Dead silence. I bolted, didn't look back, and I didn't try to lock the door. I just ran through the dark like something was right behind me, even though I couldn't hear anything chasing me. When I reached the lodge, I slammed the door shut behind me and sat on the floor, trying to catch my breath. Safe to say, I didn't sleep a wink. I didn't tell the others the full story. I didn't know how to. The next morning, I told George the cabin smelled worse, though, and that the bunk was still leaking. He nodded at me and said, "That place always gets the worst of it in spring." Then he took a long sip from his mug and said nothing else. The rest of the week went by without incident, but I only went back to that cabin one time. It was before I left. I had to check it myself, in daylight. That panel at the base of the bunk? Gone. Nailed shut with new boards, fresh hammer marks and all. The mattress was also replaced. I didn't see George do it, but somehow I know he knew. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. Also, the username PolarKnight42 is an alias used for this story for the sake of anonymity. If you find someone online with that username, please don't harass them because it's not the same person. Thank you. Chat ruined my life. From TwitchyDude. I'd been streaming for a few years when PolarKnight42 showed up in my chat. Back then, I was pulling maybe 150 concurrent viewers on a good night, mostly playing indie horror games and retro stuff. I made just enough between donations, subs, and sponsorships to cover my half of the rent on the apartment, which I shared with Jess in the suburbs outside Portland. Jess was my girlfriend. Polar Knight 42 seemed cool at first. Showed up during a Silent Hill 2 playthrough, made actually funny jokes about the voice acting, and started donating $5 here and there with messages that made the whole chat laugh. The kind of viewer every small streamer loves. Engaged, supportive, helps keep the energy up during slow parts. Within a month, he was one of my top contributors. Not huge amounts of money, but consistent. $20 every stream with some reference to an inside joke from the community. He recognized everyone by username, remembered important things about their lives that they might mention, about how one person mentioned his dad in the hospital, and Polar Knight 42 donated $50 with a message about hoping everything turned out okay. The tone shift happened gradually. First, it was the questions about my schedule. He wanted to know exactly when I'd be streaming. Got annoyed when I was late or had to cancel streams. He said he arranged his work breaks around my streams and that I was being inconsiderate. I laughed it off, thanking him for being such a dedicated viewer. But something felt off about how serious he seemed. The personal questions came next. He would donate with messages asking where exactly in Portland I lived. Said I mentioned a gym that I went to once and wanted to know the exact one. And he wanted to know the make and model of my car. When I deflected or ignored these, he'd get passive-aggressive. Say things like how he supported me more than anyone else, that he deserved to know his favorite streamer more. Other regulars started to call him out for being weird, which just made him more defensive. Jess noticed I was stressed out about it. By then we'd been together 4 years and lived together for 2. She worked at a marketing firm downtown. Wasn't really into gaming but supported what I did. I told her about this guy, how he was starting to creep me out. She said I should just ban him and move on if he was making me uncomfortable. Money wasn't worth feeling unsafe. The breaking point came during a charity stream. I was doing a 12-hour marathon for Extra Life, about 8 hours in and exhausted but in good spirits. We'd almost raised a couple grand. Polar Knight 42 had been in chat all day, getting increasingly aggressive. He'd started making comments about other viewers, calling them fake fans, saying he was the only one who really cared about me. He then donated $100 with a message that included my real last name, which I know for a fact I had never shared on stream, and mentioned the coffee shop on Burnside, where I sometimes worked on video editing. The whole chat went quiet, and I felt my face go cold. I thanked him for the donation through gritted teeth, then quietly banned him while transitioning to a break screen. The meltdown was immediate. Within minutes, I had 20+ notifications on every social media platform I had. Burner accounts spamming my Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn with the same message. That I was ungrateful, that he'd made me who I was, that I would regret this. He posted screenshots of every donation he'd ever made, demanding I unban him or refund all his money. I blocked and reported everything, but new accounts kept popping up. The messages got darker. He said he knew where I lived. He didn't include the address, but described my building accurately. He said he'd seen Jess leave for work that morning wearing her blue coat. That one made me call the cops, but they said without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I keep documenting everything. After that, things with Jess started to fall apart. She became distant and was always on her phone, and she started to work late more often. When I tried to talk about the stalking situation, she seemed distracted and dismissive. She would just tell me I was being paranoid, that internet trolls were just part of the job. This from the woman who'd been telling me to ban him weeks earlier. I found out what was happening by accident. She'd left her laptop open on the couch, and a Facebook message notification had popped up. It was from some guy. The preview showed enough. "Miss you too. Can't wait to finally see you in person." My stomach sank. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There were weeks of messages. This guy was apparently a trainer at the gym downtown. He had professional-looking headshots, was ripped, unfortunately. The works. They'd been talking for weeks. Started with him complimenting her Instagram posts, and evolved into daily conversations and sexting. They had plans to meet that weekend, while I was supposedly going to be streaming. The confrontation was ugly. I showed her what I'd found, and she tried to turn it around on me for snooping. Said I'd been distant, obsessed with my streaming drama, that this guy actually listened to her. When I pointed out the timing, how this started right after the Polar Night 42 situation exploded, she got defensive. Said not everything was about my stupid streaming career. We broke up that night. 4 years and done. I crashed on my buddy AJ's couch for a week, looking for a place. But the stalking intensified. Polar Night 42 somehow found out about the breakup immediately. The harassment moved from angry to gleeful. Messages about how I deserved it, how I'd lost everything, how this was just the beginning. He started to include details about the breakup that he shouldn't have known. Private stuff only Jess and I had discussed. That's when a horrible thought hit me. I did a reverse image search on the guy's photos. Stock photography. Fitness influencer posts from 3 different guys' accounts. The Facebook profile had been created exactly 3 weeks ago, right after I banned Polar Night 42. I called Jess, tried to explain to her. She hung up on me twice before I finally got through. I told her to check the photos, really check them. Search for the guy at the gym he claimed to work at. She called back an hour later. The gym had never heard of him. The phone number he'd given her was a burner app. Everything was fake. She wanted to fix things, work through it. But my trust with her was completely gone. She'd chosen a catfish over me. Shared intimate photos with a stalker who'd used them to taunt me from anonymous accounts. She'd given him ammunition, stuff about our life and our relationship and my insecurities. Whether she meant to or not, she'd collaborated with my stalker. I moved back to my parents' house in Eugene. I told them I needed a break from streaming, from Portland and everything. They were supportive, even if they didn't fully understand what was going on. I set up in my old bedroom and started to apply for normal jobs, tried to figure out what came next for me. The harassment followed me, but slower and less intense. There were a few emails to my old accounts, a package sent to my parents' house, just an empty box with a note that said, "Remember when you had a career?" Dad wanted to call the cops again, but I was so tired. I just wanted it to stop. 2 weeks into living at home, I woke up to my mom screaming in the backyard. Their cat, Mocha, a fat orange tabby they'd had for 15 years, was lying by the back fence. Someone had stabbed her. She was still warm. Mom was devastated, and Dad was beyond furious. I just felt numb, because I knew immediately what this was, even though I couldn't prove it. I never streamed again. I deleted everything. My Twitch account and YouTube archives, my Discord server, all of it. Years of work, thousands of hours of content. A community I'd built from nothing, gone. I changed my online handles and made everything private. I disappeared as completely as I could. Eventually, I got a job at a hardware store. It was boring and stable, but anonymous. It was the kind of job where no one knows your last name unless they need to. At my mom and dad's request, I started to see a therapist who specialized in this kind of stuff. I slowly began to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. The stalking stopped after the event with Mocha. Maybe Polar Knight 42 got bored once I went dark. Maybe he found a new target. Maybe he just wanted to win, and killing a beloved pet was his victory lap. I'll never know, and that's almost worse than knowing would be. It's been a couple years now. I still get that itch sometimes, whenever I see a new game announced, and think about how fun it would be to stream it with chat. I miss the community, the energy of live chat, the stress of trying to be entertaining for hours at a time even. But then I think about Mocha and Jess. I remember seeing my mom's face that morning, and I remember that somewhere out there, Polar Knight 42 probably still has screenshots of my life, knows my real name, and probably has a grudge. Sometimes Jess texts me and apologizes again. Says she's in therapy too, and working through how she fell for such an obvious manipulation. I don't respond. That chapter of my life is closed. It has to be. I work at the hardware store and I go home. I play games alone, offline, and invisible. It's safer that way. The internet has a long memory, and some viewers never really leave. One time I Googled my old username out of morbid curiosity. I found a Reddit thread in a streaming subreddit. Someone was asking whatever happened to me. Most comments said I'd just burned out, disappeared like a lot of small streamers do. But one account, created that day, replied with just, "He learned his lesson." My dad had a paper route. From IG. My father only told me this story once, when I was 16 and complaining about my part-time job at a Subway. He'd had a few beers at the family barbecue, which wasn't really like him, and I guess that loosened something he'd kept locked up since 1973. He was 12 at the time of the story, delivering the morning edition of a newspaper in our hometown before school. He says he had 43 houses on his route, which he could finish in under an hour if he hustled. He would be up at 5 a.m. and be done by 6:15, in time to catch breakfast at home and the bus. I remember laughing when he said he made $2.70 a week, and he explained that was good money for a kid back then. Sure, old man. He said that the Brenneman house was number 37 on his route. It was a big Victorian place, set back from the street, with peeling paint and grass that was always too long. Mrs. Brenneman lived there alone. Her husband had died in Korea. They had no kids, no visitors that anyone ever saw. Dad said he'd been delivering to that house for months and had never seen her once. Just the weekly envelope with exact change tucked into the mailbox every Friday. Her subscription fee and old bills that smelled like mothballs. The other paper boys had stories about her. A kid named Jimmy swore he had seen her watching from an upstairs window, just a pale shape behind yellowed curtains. Another kid, named Mike, claimed she was hideously scarred from a fire. That's why she never came outside. Kid stuff, local kid stuff. The kind of stories boys tell to make a boring job more interesting. It was a Thursday morning in November when everything changed. Dad remembered because they'd had their first hard freeze the night before, and he'd had to scrape ice off his bike seat. The papers were heavy that day, Thanksgiving sales inserts, and his fingers were numb by the time he reached the Brenneman house. He was about to toss the paper onto the porch like always, when he saw her. She was standing right at the front door, visible through the glass storm door. First time he'd seen her in 6 months. She was wearing what looked like a hospital gown, pale blue, and her white hair hung loose past her shoulders. She raised one hand, gesturing for him to get closer. Dad said he thought something was wrong, that maybe she'd fallen and gotten injured and needed some help. So he walked his bike up the front path, squinting in the pre-dawn darkness. The porch light was off, but there was a lamp on somewhere inside, backlighting her silhouette. When he got to the bottom of the porch steps, close enough to really see her, he understood why she never went outside. Her face was falling off. That's how my dad described it. It wasn't scarred or deformed, but actively falling off. The skin on the left side hung loose like wet wallpaper, revealing something underneath that was the wrong color, wrong texture. Her eye on that side had dropped almost to her cheekbone, still somehow attached but dangling. When she tried to smile at him, the movement made more skin slide down, bunching at her jawline like melted wax. She opened the storm door and stepped onto the front step, and her stench immediately hit him, like a walking corpse. She was trying to talk to him too, but her mouth wouldn't work right. It was more like wet sounds. She reached for him with both hands, and he saw that her fingers were wrong too. Far too long and thin, like they'd been repeatedly broken and healed. Dad dropped his bike and ran. He said he'd never run like that before or since. Behind him, he could hear her coming down the front step. Irregular footsteps, more like dragging and lurching. That wet, wordless calling getting fainter as he put distance between them. He finished his route in record time, hands trembling so bad he could barely grip his handlebars. He tossed the last papers from the middle of the street, didn't care where they landed. When he got home, his mother asked why he looked so pale, and he gave her the whole story. Mrs. Brenneman's place burned down in 1981 after a lightning strike. They found her body in the basement, along with medical equipment and boxes of skin grafts that had never been used. Experimental treatments from a VA hospital, the kind they tried on burn victims before they knew what they were really doing. The kind that failed in ways they didn't put in medical journals. Dad said he drove by that lot 20 years later. Nothing there now but a square of dead grass where the house had been. He swears now that nothing actually grows there, like the soil itself is cursed. If any of you ever try to stalk me, I'm making a homunculus to hunt you down. Don't even try me. I saw a Russian guy on YouTube make his own homunculuses, and I know for a fact they spit acid. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails. You can also order my new book, Creepy Campfire Stories, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or just go to creepycampfirestories.com. It comes out in a little over a week. Thank you. You can also send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit if you want me to narrate them on the show. And to help us grow, be sure to follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Now, after working the first, second, third, and fourth shift, it's time for me to go to bed. Until next time, everyone, I hope your hours are short, your wages high, and your job not scary.